red. It's been 12 years since everyone disappeared. Well, 12 years, 1 month, 3 weeks, and 17 days to be exact. But who is counting anyway? As I was sitting on the edge of the small water dock somewhere in Maine, I imagined myself 12 years younger. It was a more complicated time, having to juggle work, social interactions, family, friends, and chores. I needed a break from all of it, to be honest. I needed a vacation. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. How can the sudden disappearance of all humankind simplify stuff, hey? Why was I left alone on this faithful Tuesday morning in 2023? I'll never know. During the following years, I searched for answers. Logical, metaphysical, paranormal, and philosophical. Nothing. Future historians will have to ponder why a single European man was left the only person on this wretched planet. If there are any historians, or the future for that matter. Stranded in the great white north of Canada, I spent the better part of a year searching for human contact. Nothing. Only the purity of wildlife remains. Grass overtook the streets and highways after a while. Plants and trees were sprouting in places where there was concrete. Animals roam free and wild, just as Mother Nature intended. They are unencumbered by pesky humans. My best guess is that Thanos finally snapped his fingers again, and this time he wiped all humans from Earth except me. Frankly, I've imagined this scenario in my head hundreds of times since I was a teenager. One day you wake up and everyone is gone. Poof, no more humanity. You are the solitary survivor, left to rule over Earth with an iron fist. The possibilities were endless. Movie theaters are open all the time. Granted, you have to load the movies into the projectors and make your own popcorn. But hey, those are the perks of being the last man alive. Clothing stores, gun shops, and fishing shacks are all yours. So are the huge skyscrapers, gas stations, and factories. You could travel the world, see everything you always wanted to see. You have endless time on your hands. You were the richest man on the planet, after all. My adolescent mind didn't think about all the problems such a scenario would present. No electricity, no networks, no internet, no phones. I never thought about it deeply, to be honest. When you are actually living in your daydream, you realize some bitter truths. You don't know how to drive a boat, nor can you fly a plane, or you haven't the faintest idea about survival. You are a city boy through and through. I was born and raised in the soft blanket of convenience called modern technology. You don't know how to light a fire. Do you remember all those survival videos you watched online? You have never killed an animal for food, can't hunt, and are pretty much useless. No electricity meant no phones, no GPS, and no online maps. You had to resort to navigating via a normal paper map if you wanted to go somewhere. And what if you weren't home at the time of the snap? Yeah, I know Marvel insists on calling it the blip. But the blip is a stupid name, and I am Marvel now, so I make the rules. Well, I wasn't home, I wasn't in Europe, I was stuck in Canada. Though not an entirely bad place to be stuck in, I spent a year or so wandering around North America, particularly in the United States. No people meant no visas, no restrictions, just endless roaming. I traveled everywhere I always wanted to. Los Angeles, New Orleans, the Grand Canyon, Nashville, Florida, New York, and Yosemite National Park. Though some of the charm of those places was lost, the locals are the flavor of the meal. Without them, you are eating plain bread. It is still quite satiating, but after a while it becomes bland, tasteless, and hard to swallow. I even got to the border with Mexico. I got the bright idea to take a boat and visit some small Caribbean islands. But then the wiser part of me spoke. It reminded me that I could not swim. Operating a vessel I knew nothing about would guarantee drowning. We can't have the living memory of humankind drown, now can we? So I turned around and headed back to Canada. Now you would be right in asking, why would you move back to Canada? You can go anywhere in North America and live in a normal climate, not the cold and unforgiving weather of the Great White North. Well, my stuff was in Canada, okay? I liked my stuff. Stuff I owned before the snap. It had sentimental value. Funny, huh? The world is your oyster, but you come back to your old crappy stuff time and time again. People strive for normalcy and familiarity, I guess. One night as I was warming my hands by a fire, somewhere near Los Angeles, on my way back home to Canada, I befriended a puppy. He came out of nowhere and probably smelled the searing sausages I had in my small metal pan. A welcome sight for sore eyes. He seemed so alone and scared. a furry little outcast in the big scary world, I immediately claimed him by giving him the extremely original name Red. He seemed to like it. Quite fitting for a bloodhound, in my opinion. Red became my best friend. He seldomly howled and barked in agreement with my outlandish statements as I argued the very existence of life. Me and Red arrived back home after quite an uneventful journey. We decided that it was time to move houses. We wanted to live near the water so we could have fresh fish when we craved some aquatic meat in our diet. We settled in a nice town not more than 50 feet from a small bay. It was a gorgeous little place, back in the day. Impossible to afford, now completely free. We were rummaging through the drawers of our new abode for useful supplies when something interesting happened. Red bumped me with his big head. When I turned around, I saw him holding a small book in his mouth, happily wagging his tail. "Give," I said. The dog gently let go of the book. In my hands, I was holding a manual for a small plane, the Bombardier Challenger 605. At this exact moment it hit me. This is my way home. I've been thinking about it for a while now. Me and Red sat down for dinner in the living room. The warm, fuzzy fire was crackling next to us while I was perusing through the instruction manual of the Bombardier. Good old Red sighed deeply and put his slobbering face on my lap. I looked at those droopy, sad eyes, and I can swear I heard him say the famous quote from the movie Green Mile. "I'm tired, boss. Tired of being on the road, lonely as a sparrow in the rain. I'm tired of never having me a buddy to be with, to tell me where we're going to or coming from, or why." It might have been my twisted imagination, but at that moment I decided. "Look, buddy," I put the manual in front of his face. His big, wet nose began to familiarize itself with the page. "This is going to get us home. We are going to find a plane and fly across the Atlantic, even if it takes our lives. We are going to die where our ancestors lived. Well, mine at least. Who knows where you came from?" His tail started wagging excitedly. If I had a tail, I would swing it back and forth as well. We have a mission now. We had a purpose. From that day on, me and Red spent the days in every library where we could find books about flying. I was reading day and night, taking notes in a little notebook, while my four-legged companion was sniffing and playing around, quiet as a mouse. At some point, after reading tens of books about aviation and airplane construction, I decided to have a test flight. But where do I find a small plane? Off to the nearest airport we went. Navigating there was pretty simple. There was no electricity, no phone service, and no navigation, which made me pretty good at orienting myself on a paper map. We finally made it to the airport, and we spent the first night there. It was getting dark, and Red was getting restless. The next morning, we set out to find the private hangars. Luckily for us, all of the private planes were neatly parked inside. Unfortunately for us, only 2 were accessible. 2 years ago, there was a big earthquake, which should have remained in my memory if I hadn't had to remember everything else going on in the world. I am the living memory of humanity. After all, I had to keep the important stuff in and disregard the minor annoyances of everyday life. Half of the private hangar had collapsed on the parked planes. I should have remembered that earthquake. "No fear," I shouted excitedly to Red, who hollered, wagging his tail. I stepped into the cockpit of a small water transport plane. I hadn't read the manual for it, but how hard could it be, huh? Everything should be pretty similar, right? The primary control system seemed in decent enough shape. The ailerons, rudder, and elevator seemed to be operational. The yoke seemed in pretty good condition, the same as the pedals. This little plane wouldn't get us home, but it was as good for testing as anything. Key? How do I start this thing? There is no key. Frantically, I started to tap all of my pockets and then realized that I never had a key to a plane in my life. Old habits. I limbed down and started to look for a drawer or a container of some sort, with the hope of the ignition key waiting for me there. Red felt excited, sensing that something big was about to happen. In one of the black metal cabinets, I found it. Neatly tucked away between some more manuals and a pilot hat, I took the hat and the key. Who needs more manuals anyway? I hopped back into the cabin. Key. Ignition. The front propeller started spinning. The noise of the little plane scared good old Red, and he ran and hid behind a pile of uniforms. "All right, let's do this thing." I gently nudged the plane forward, and it started moving. We are driving a plane. I shouted towards the pile of stacked-up clothes, and Red's ears perked up a little. I got it out on the little runway in front of me and started slowly maneuvering it left and right. I didn't dare pull the yoke toward me. My goal for now was to see if I could feel the dimensions of the plane and get used to the center of gravity and maneuverability of this craft. Half an hour later, I got pretty good at maneuvering on the ground. I glanced down and noticed the needle on the fuel gauge was resting firmly on 0. Crap! I forgot about fuel. The propeller started to wind down, and after a minute or so, the whole plane screeched to a sad halt. Right. We need fuel. I climbed down and my best friend ran to me. He was so happy. For the last couple of years, we didn't separate at all, and my little plane adventure must have scared him. "Who's a good boy?" I petted him on the head. "We've got to find some fuel supplies, buddy, if we ever want to fly one of those scary machines." Red woofed 3 times in agreement. If I was fuel, where would I be? I started to look around, and in the distance, I saw a white pickup truck. It had a huge cylindrical tank attached to its back. On the side of it, with big red letters, was the word flammable. Never have I been so happy to see that word in my entire life. "Come on, pal, I'll race you." Red was already in front of me, running towards the pickup, howling and hollering with happiness. Just my luck. There is no key for this either. I guess I am pushing it. I put the pickup in neutral and started to push as hard as I could. When the car got a little momentum going, I hopped in and steered it towards the small plane in the distance. It felt like weeks of hard labor, but in the end, we finally got it there. Suddenly rain. It started pouring like no tomorrow. Me and Red ran inside the VIP lounge that was close by. "Guess we are spending the night here, bud." Red was content as long as it was warm and dry. As I was lying down looking at the rainy, dark sky, it hit me. I am living the "I am a legend" life. Here I am, probably the last man on the planet. We don't know that for certain. My trusted dog companion, while not a German shepherd, is still a pretty cool breed. Where are the zombies? Are zombies coming next? I panicked and squeezed Red even harder. I must have pressed on something because my poor friend growled a little, so I loosened my grip. No zombies are coming. Lord, how I miss movies and electricity. The little fire was dying down at this point, so I snuggled Red in the sleeping bag and fell asleep. I was secure in my thoughts that no zombies were coming to eat me. Red and I spent the next couple of months living at the airport. We stayed in the VIP section, of course. I thought it would be appropriate to rename it OIP, Only Important Person. I got really good at handling the little water airplane. On top of my ground training, I found some extremely reliable repair manuals, so I started to tinker with the plane. It's always a good idea to know how to repair a machine, especially if it's going to be your only means of transportation for a while. I was hesitant to take this bird to the sky, mostly because I didn't want to leave Red alone on the ground, and secondly, because I didn't want to die. On Christmas Day 2027, I took the leap. I secured the little pilot hat on top of Red's head, carried him in the cockpit with me, and strapped him in. If I am dying tonight, I am dying with my best friend. We pulled up to the very edge of the runway and started the engine. The little front propeller was spinning with lightning speed. Poor old Red was shaking and squirming, but there was no turning back. "Full speed ahead, my friend." I smiled at my dog and lunged the plane forward. As soon as we hit operational speed on the runway, I slowly pulled the yoke towards me. I felt the little kick of the front wheels separating from the ground, then the back ones. One quick turn of the yoke to the left to avoid the overgrown tree below us, and we were flying. Finally in the air. After the initial shock, poor Red calmed down and started to look out the window at the shrinking ground below us. "I feel the need for speed," I said so proudly, and put my reflective aviator glasses on. Yes, it was night, but who cares? I don't have a control tower to tell me off, plus there is only me in the sky. As far as I knew, no birds were flying during the night, hence the reason I chose to take my first flight at night. The view wasn't very spectacular. There was no electricity, so you couldn't admire the 1,000 little lights below you. Pitch black, everywhere. Only the sound of the front blades spinning, the wind whooshing, and Red barking and hollering at the passing little gusts of dense fog. Get them, boy, get those bad fog clouds. I was so happy. I could already see us flying over the Atlantic with a bigger and better plane. My furry co-pilot got restless after a while, so I made maneuvers for landing. I did everything I had read in the books. I got the airplane at the correct airspeed. I used the right power configuration and appropriate flap settings. Also maintained the proper attitude and altitude. We were at the proper height of 50 feet above the runway. I pointed the nose of the plane down and started to orient it towards the horizon. Lowered the wheels down, just like the book said. The pilot was expected to bring the front wheel into contact with the ground as soon as the nose of the plane leveled with the horizon, but it didn't. I heard a screeching noise below us. Immediately lost control of the aircraft and landed heavily on the backside. Either I did something completely wrong or the runway froze. Me, Red, and the plane got ourselves in a very nasty tailspin. None of the controls were responding, at all. The little water passenger plane was spinning, and the end was coming quickly. The end in this case was the big concrete wall of the VIP building. Closing my eyes, I asked the powers above to spare me one more time. A sickening metal versus concrete thud ripped through the airport as my little night adventure ended. Thank the heavens Red was okay. The poor thing was shaking like a leaf. We climbed out of the smoking aircraft as quickly as possible. "That was close, huh, buddy?" said I, kneeling next to Red. There was no more blood in my bloodhound. He was so scared that at this point, he was only a hound. The airplane started smoking even more. Seconds later, it erupted in bright red flames. The whole aircraft was burned to a crisp 30 minutes after that. The shock and disappointment of my magnificent failure ruled over my thoughts that night. I held Red in my arms tighter than I ever did. The mere thought of losing him made me want to hurl. I have lost a lot of people in my life. This dog, though, was going to be something else. He was my everything. I can't afford to threaten his life anymore with my stupidity and ineptitude. That night, I decided that we would never fly a plane again. That night, my new dream of dying where my ancestors did turned into ashes with that little water plane. The next morning, I took a last look at the black wreckage on the little runway, gathered our stuff, and headed southeast. For the next 5 years, I and Red roamed the deserted United States. We wined and dined at all of the abandoned Michelin-starred restaurants we could find. I went to every single theme park, and even though there was no electricity to go on the rides, it was still fun. Time froze everything. Nature was still slowly reclaiming its long-lost land. It was truly a magnificent experience. During our travels, we found a nice little book named 50 States and 1,000 Things to See in Them. It turned out to be quite a handy tour guide. We visited all 1,000 places described in the little booklet and took as many Polaroid photos as we could. After all those years, flying was still on my mind. Now and again I catch myself staring at flying birds in the sky, wishing that was us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we could have done it. Then I remembered the crash of the little water transport plane on Christmas Eve. I could still see how scared Red was, and I snapped right back to reality. "I will never risk your life again, buddy." I was saying this to my dog while giving him energetic head scratches. Old Red was right by my side every single second of the way. On the 10th anniversary of the mass disappearance, or the snap, if you will, I noticed he was struggling to climb a small hill I wanted to camp on that night. I've been noticing more and more of the white fur that has covered him. He's getting quite old now. His beautiful, wrinkled face was droopier than usual. He was breathing heavily and barely lifting his legs. "Enough roaming, buddy. We are settling down." I hugged him tightly that night. We settled in a small fishing village in Maine. I always wanted to live in Stephen King's novel, so here we were. There were lots of boats in the local harbor, and in the distance I could see a small private airport, but I didn't dare go there. The little cottage we chose had a small porch on which Red loved to lay, with me sitting next to him, sipping on expired beer and watching the sunset. It was the perfect life for a tired man and his even more tired dog. From time to time, old Red had the energy to chase a wandering squirrel, but after a while he got exhausted and slept through the day. I fixed our little house as much as I could. Surprisingly, after a decade of self-reliance, you become very skilled with all kinds of instruments. You give yourself little projects to complete, and by the end, you've mastered another thing you never knew you would. It was exactly 11 years to the day when I first met Red. He was lying on his favorite spot on the porch when he put his head on my lap. He looked me in the eye with his dark, droopy eyes and sighed loudly. "I know, buddy, I'm tired too," I said while gently playing with his long ear. "It's been one hell of a ride, huh? 11 years ago you appeared from nowhere and you saved me. You discovered me when I was lost. You gave me all the love in the world you had in you. Boy, you did have some love to give. I love you, Red, with every single fiber of my being." I was sobbing. Red's heart stopped a couple of days later. My best friend died, and a part of me died as well. I never felt so empty. The whole world disappeared and I was sort of okay with that. I wasn't lonely. I didn't feel alone. I was a little happy, in fact. Now, it was unbearable. I hugged him as tight as I could, expecting him to growl at me out of frustration, but it was over. I got the shovel we had found a couple of months ago and buried him next to the house. I decorated his little tombstone with the pilot hat I found years prior. He looked so cute in that, even though he didn't always approve of it. Devastation overcame me. I was roaming the streets aimlessly, quickly turning around, expecting to see his goofy face any time a bush rustled behind me. One night, I accidentally ended up at the small airport. I stepped through the barrier and started wandering. The private plane section was in front of me, so I decided to take a peek. There was only one plane in the hangar, the Bombardier Challenger 605. I started crying. "It has been a year, my old friend," I whispered. There was no Red, and with him my fear of dying disappeared as well. I inspected the plane. It seemed in pretty good condition at first glance. I moved all my stuff to the little private airport and began working on the plane. It didn't need a lot. Some small repairs here and there caused it to not be flown for more than a decade. People had installed the fuel pump right in the hangar, so there was no need to push pickup trucks this time. After a month of thorough inspections and tests, I was ready to take to the skies. I parked the Bombardier at the start of the surprisingly long runway. Sitting in the cockpit without my best friend felt weird. I had to say a last goodbye. I ran as fast as I could towards my old little cottage. When I reached old Red's grave, I was already in tears. "This is it, boy." I fell on my knees. "I'm really doing this. There's no point in me staying here any longer without you. I hope you are chasing squirrels and eating fresh sausages in heaven. 'Cause all dogs go to heaven, right, buddy? I hope you are happy. I love you, Red." Nothing but the slight breeze broke the silence. I took a long walk to the nearest dock. I sat down and opened my last expired beer, which at this point was mostly gas water with some color. I looked at one last Maine sunset and reminisced. It is time. Back to the plane I went, locked, loaded, and ready to go. The takeoff was a little shaky, but I managed to get it right. And I was flying. Everything felt so natural this time, as if I were doing it all my life. The sun was glistening below me as the mighty North American continent became a tiny line behind me. Red was on my mind. Red was always on my mind. He would have enjoyed this very much. A flock of geese seemed to have the same idea as me and leveled with the plane. "Get 'em, buddy," I whispered as my eyes filled with tears. It must have been a couple of hours since I took off, but my eyes started to close. Eyelids were so heavy. Maybe a fast little shut-eye won't be so bad. My ears were ringing like 1,000 bells. A sudden jolt woke me up. I was in a downward spiral headed for the black water below. I didn't even have the time to react. The Bombardier crashed into the Atlantic waters with such force that it splashed water as tall as a 3-story building. "Mr. Cook," I heard a voice behind me. I turned around, but there was nobody there. It was so nice to hear my name again. I haven't heard it in a decade. "Mr. Cook!" There it is again. The voice. The small plane was sinking fast into the depths of the ocean. The metal was starting to crack under the pressure of the cold water. "Mr. Cook, Mr. Cook, please." The ghostly voice was getting more and more persistent. Why is this woman saying my name? Wait, there is no woman. I am the only living human on the planet, right? The windows of the Bombardier burst and water started pouring in. A white light flashed before my eyes as the controls of the plane went out. "Okay, Mr. Cook, you have to snap out of it now," the voice commanded. "The white light." I opened my eyes and took a long, hard breath. I could breathe again. There were people around me. I was in a small, white, grey, luxurious room with people. "What?" I stammered. "He is back. Stacy, next time check the dosage, please, and if needed, lower it to 17 milligrams. We can't afford such mistakes. It's unprofessional. Now go and find Nancy and tell her to get Mr. Cook's clothes from storage. Hurry." A blonde woman in a blue power suit holding a clipboard was barking orders beside my head. "What is going on?" I rose up in the comfortable bed I was lying on. "Who are you? How are you alive?" "Mr. Cook, welcome back. Your memory will return to full capacity in the next 10 minutes. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions if you don't mind," said the blonde woman, clicking her pen. "No, wait, I want to ask you a couple of questions myself. How are you alive? Am I the only man left? What is going on? Where am I?" I was so dumbfounded. "How real would you rate your experience from 1 to 10, with 1 being extremely unrealistic and 10 being undistinguishable from reality?" asked the woman. "What? What wasn't real? What is this?" "From 1 to 10, Mr. Cook," she persisted. 15. I lived a decade in North America. Of course, everything was real. Is this real? Or am I dead, and this is some twisted joke about purgatory? "You are most certainly not dead, Mr. Cook. That would be against the terms of service and a severe breach of contract," the blonde woman replied, with unbelievable calmness. A massive headache tore my head in two. Suddenly, years of memories, experiences, and trauma started flooding in. The gates were open, and there was no turning back. "Was this experience to your satisfaction?" The woman adjusted her posture in the chair, expecting my answer. "Yes, what experience? My head is going to explode." "The headaches are normal, Mr. Cook. The brain readjusts to normal reality while the sedative wears off," said the woman as she was walking towards the door. "Nancy will bring you your clothes, and you will be ready to leave in a couple of minutes." She closed the door behind her. My life came back to me, all of it. The memory of Red still burns in my mind. What was this? Some experiment or something? A sweet girl in a ponytail came in and brought a bag and left it right next to my bed. "How are you feeling, Mr. Cook?" "I am Mrs. Green's assistant, Nancy." I nodded. "All right, Mr. Cook, you are good to go. Please fill out this questionnaire before you leave. Thank you so much for using our services, and we hope to see you again. You can leave the room whenever you are ready, and our driver will take you wherever you need to go. Oh, and here is a little pamphlet if you want to share your experience with your friends. Have a good day now, Mr. Cook." The young girl smiled politely and left the room. I was staring at the pamphlet. LCTL is the place where you can relive the moments that you missed. Welcome to the first of its kind 100% immersive VR experience. With our revolutionary brain stimulation technology, you will not believe how real it is. Have you ever lost a family member that you never had a chance to spend time with? We offer you that time back. Call the number at the bottom of this pamphlet or visit our website to register and to get more detailed information. I started dressing up. As I was putting on the jacket, I felt a small bulge in the inner pocket. It was a photograph of me as a very young boy, wearing what seemed to be a pilot's hat, standing in front of a playground airplane. Next to me was an extremely old dog, a bloodhound. I turned the picture with shaking hands. It read, "Me and Old Red, 1975. The end.